Hello and welcome back. I hope everybody had a good Christmas. If you celebrate, I did have a great Christmas with my family, which is why this video is coming out today instead of yesterday. But also no games today, so that will factor into how we play the schedule this week. Now, the World Juniors start today, and this is arguably my favorite time of the year. Getting to watch all the top prospects battle it out has become one of my favorite holiday traditions. But we don't have any fantasy relevance from guys like Connor Bedard and Adam Fantilli quite yet. So let's take a look at the Week 12 schedule. Now, for Week 12, there's only 4 teams that play 4 times, and there are 2 teams that only play twice. But you probably shouldn't own any Ducks or Flyers anyway. So if you have, maybe Travis Konechny, Kevin Hayes, Carter Hart, and maybe Troy Terry or something like that, you could hold on to them. But otherwise, drop your Ducks and Flyers for this week. Now, usually the teams with the 4-game weeks are where we want to start when it comes to waiver ads, but as you can see from the schedule down below, no games on today, which is Monday, and then the heavy nights are Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday, and all of these teams that play 4 times have 3 games on those heavy nights, and therefore the waiver pickups that you would add from those teams wouldn't get in your lineup since it's probably going to be full anyways. So instead, we're going to do what Boomer Gordon on SiriusXM suggested on Friday, and that is to target teams that play Wednesday, Friday, and Sunday. Now, the 2 teams that play those nights are the Kraken and the Devils, and if you look at the numbers above their opponents, you'll see that these schedules are not created equal. So the Devils play 3 times this week. They have 3 teams in the top 10 in terms of goals against, whereas the Kraken do have some favorable opponents, and all of their games are at home on top of that. So let's start with some of the Kraken ads. And of course, I've been saying all year, for no reason, almost everyone on the Kraken is available on the waiver wire. So when it comes to Seattle this week, whatever kind of category specialist works best for your team needs and or your league format, you can find a guy for that in Seattle. The Kraken don't have a lot of Swiss Army knife kind of guys that can do a little bit of everything. And if they did, you'd see the guys in the high 70s or above in the player ranking on the right, or the left in this case. This shows us how complete a player is in fantasy. How much do they cover in terms of all the categories, including hits and blocks? So I will be coming up with different player hubs that don't have hits and blocks if your league doesn't have those. But for leagues that do have hits and blocks, this is a rating system based on how well they cover goals, assists, power play points, shots, hits, and blocks per game, and what percentile in the entire league they rank. And then this number is the average percentile. So Matty Beniers is the most complete player, and so on and so forth as we work our way down. But they do have a lot of guys that are specialty tools, guys that are really good in one or two things. So in order to tackle this kind of task, let's look at some of the guys that are doing well in one or two categories specifically. So the ad for this week, if you're looking for goals, shots, and power play points, is Daniel Sprong. He's 2% owned, a dual eligible winger, leads the team in power play points over the last month. He's second on the team with 7 goals in that time span, and over the last 2 weeks, he's averaging 3.5 shots per game, despite only 10:27 of ice time. So if you look at the graphic, that's a list of goals per 60, and Daniel Sprong is second in the league, ahead of Connor McDavid, Jason Robertson, David Pastrnak, and only trailing Tage Thompson. So I really do not understand why he's only seeing 10 minutes per game on the 4th line, but he is seeing some power play time, so that does help his fantasy value, and he's clearly a shooter who can finish. So he would be one of the top ads this week. As you can see, 10 points in his last 13 games, 32 shots, and his shots per game are climbing up. So if he can get a little bit higher in the lineup, 5-on-5, and then continue his power play production, this is an excellent time to buy low on Daniel Sprong. Now, similarly, Jared McCann is also on this list. He's 21% owned, center left wing. He leads the team with 9 goals in his last 13 games. I've been featuring him on the channel for quite a while because of his goals above expected, and he isn't showing any signs of slowing down. The only thing that hurts his fantasy value is a lack of PP1 time, but he does get some PP2 time, and he's a pure goal scorer. As you can see here, he's one of the top 6 best goals per 60 players in the league. So another guy that you can target for goals and potentially shots as well. If you do want some shots, Jordan Eberle has been leading the team over the past month with 2.85 shots per game. So he's another option. And last week, Ryan Donato had a pretty decent week in terms of both offensive production and some shot volume, but I just don't see that happening for that much longer. It seemed like a one-off, but that is something you could keep an eye on. He's 0% owned, so if you're in a very deep league, Ryan Donato did have a good week last week. Now, if you're in the market for a hits and blocks defenseman, then you should look at Adam Larson. Yahoo ranked 90 over the last month. He's 34% owned, and he's 93rd percentile in the league in hits per game and 98th percentile in blocks per game. And on top of that, he has 12 points in 32 games, so he's getting a little bit of offensive production as well. Now, I highlighted him in my most recent hits and blocks video, but he's still out there in most leagues, so if he's available, go and pick him up. But if he's not available, you could try out Will Borgen, only 1% owned, 3.62 hits per game, which is a lot, and then 1.38 blocks per game over the last month. Yahoo ranked 101 over the last 2 weeks with 4 assists in his last 6 games to go with all of those hits and blocks. This kind of offensive production is hard to predict for Borgen, but the hits and blocks give him a usefulness in leagues with those categories. Now, there is one more player that I did want to mention, and it's someone I talked about a few times in the preseason, but he just hasn't been back to his normal self until very recently, and that is Brandon Tanev. Now, Brandon Tanev used to be the ultimate hits forward. In 2021, Tanev averaged 4.34 hits per game, good for 3rd in the entire league behind Radko Gudas and Brady Tkachuk. Last year, those numbers were down to 3.27, as you can see over here. And this year, they're down even further to 2.60. So a trend in the wrong direction. But if you look at the last 2 weeks, his average is back up to 3.33 hits per game, which is exactly what you'd like to see. If you look at his player hub from 21-22 on the right, he was a rating of 70, meaning he was averaging 70th percentile in the league across all these categories. This year, he's a 56. And the main reason is his lack of goal production. So he basically cut his goal production from 0.30 goals per game to 0.13. So it's basically cut in half. And he currently sits 2.4 goals below expected with his shooting percentage at 10%. Now, he's usually in that range, but in the previous 2 seasons, he was at 16% and 17% shooting. So he has that capability and goal scoring touch. Now, last week, he was Yahoo rank 80 in category leagues with 1 goal, 4 assists, 9 shots, and 20 hits. And for all of you out there who took my advice on Tanner Jeannot and just couldn't wait on his goal scoring to come, and I'm in that camp, I've already dropped Jeannot, you could give Brandon Tanev that roster spot at this point and expect him to start producing a little bit more. Let's all remember that Tanev missed most of the season last year with a torn ACL, and it does take some time to get back to form after an injury like that. It is early, but the signs are there that this could be a good Jeannot replacement going forward. So if you need a guy up front specifically who's going to get you hits and then a little bit of other production, this is a guy who hasn't been getting it done lately, but he's been returning from injury. So if you look at what he's typically done, he is typically good for goal production, obviously hits, and then he covers a little bit of everything else. Now, quickly back at the schedule, I mentioned that the Devils play Wednesday, Friday, and Sunday, which is all the light nights, which is what you want to target, but they do have 3 very difficult matchups. But with all that said, the Devils are tied for 7th in the league in team goals for, but their team shooting percentage over the last 8 games, where they're 1-6-1, is at 6.6%. So what this tells me is that they're still generating chances, they just aren't finishing. And it's perhaps a little bit of a regression to the mean from that incredible win streak that they were on where they won 13 in a row. But they are capable of producing offense even against solid teams. So who can we target this week for fantasy? Now, the first thing I want to mention is that John Marino is week to week with an injury that we're not sure about the status of. Both him and the status of Ryan Graves. So Ryan Graves went down with an injury, and those 2 guys are their 2 best shutdown defensemen, John Marino and Ryan Graves. So if you're looking to target Mackenzie Blackwood, I do so after they get those 2 defensemen back, because it's not going to be pretty until then. They are 2 of the main reasons why they are one of the top defensive teams in the league. So with those 2 defensemen out, I wouldn't look to target Blackwood just yet. And I did mention that on the Data Draft Instagram, so if you're not following on Instagram, it's at data_draft for some quicker updates. Now, because those two defensemen are out, Brendan Smith has been playing a larger role. So he was averaging between 14 and 17 minutes a night. The last 2 games, he was at 23 and 21 plus minutes. Last week, he was Yahoo category 36 rank in category leagues because of his hits and blocks coverage. And then he chipped in 2 assists as well. So if you're in a deep league and you can't get Larson for your hits and blocks coverage, maybe try out Brendan Smith, who's getting elevated in the lineup this week. The most complete player who's available on the wire is Dawson Mercer. As you can see here, he's a 61 rating, covers quite a bit of everything, and you can see the only thing he doesn't get is hits coverage. But 2 shots per game, a little bit of power play points, some point production, goal production is pretty decent as well. The only problem with that is he's only got 1 goal, 1 assist, and 12 shots in his last 7 games, and consistency is something that almost every young player struggles with. Now, when he's on the same line as Jack Hughes and Eric Haula, they are the most productive line in the entire league with 6.52 goals for per 60. So if you notice that his line assignment has changed and he's back with Hughes and Haula, definitely go and pick him up because that is a very productive line. But currently, he's playing third line with Miles Wood and McLeod. So he's not on the right line assignment right now, and he isn't quite hot enough to potentially stream for the entire week. So who is hot right now? Well, almost nobody available on the wire is, but Thomas Tatar is close. He has 2 goals, 1 assist, 9 shots in his last 3 games, and he's on a line with Nico Hischier and Fabian Zetterlund, a line that was together for the entire 13-game winning streak. At 9% ownership, he's a dual-eligible winger. He could be very useful in deeper leagues. Same type of thing with Yegor Sharangovich. 2 goals in his last 3 games. Not a good line assignment, though. He's on the 4th line with Jesper Boquist and Alexander Holtz. But 10 goals in 34 games this year, 24 goals in 76 games last year, so he can produce when he's given a chance. But I'd monitor his line assignment, and if he cracks the top 6 or gets more power play time, then I would probably take a look at him. Now, for the best of the rest, these are some targets from the teams that play 4 times, and if you're like me and you need to replace somebody for the week and you're not just looking to maximize the volume, this is the list to start with. So we'll start off with Dylan Cousins. You should know how good he is by now. He's 87th percentile or better in goals, assists, points, shots, and power play points per game. He's averaging almost a point per game right now still. He's 57% owned, so he isn't available as much as he was when I first started highlighting him about a month ago, and at that time he was 11% owned. So if you listened to my advice in the Week 8 video and picked him up, he got you 16 points in his last 11 games over that time span, and has probably been one of your better forwards. If you can't get him, you probably need someone with a lower ownership, and that's where our next featured player comes in. So Tyler Johnson, only 2% owned, and he's currently top line with Kane and Domi and getting some power play time. And if you look at his player hub, though it is only a 10-game sample size, he's been very productive this year when he's been on the ice. Obviously, he missed a lot of time with an ankle injury. An injury risk is always there for Johnson, but for a weekly stream, who cares? 77 rating is really good because he covers just about everything. 90th percentile in goals, 93rd in power play points, and again, that top line with Kane and Max Domi, his ownership is very low. That would, I would expect that to climb over the next week or two. And then he does have the 3 goals, 5 assists, 8 points in 10 games with 3 on the power play. And since coming back from injury, he's got 1 goal, 1 assist, 8 shots in 4 games, and his ice time has been all over the map. As low as 11:43, where he potentially re-aggravated an injury, but as high as 20 minutes. So basically, if he's healthy, he's going to be playing 15 to 20 minutes a night in all of the best offensive situations. And he's not only the best Blackhawk this week, but he's potentially the best Blackhawk this season in terms of how well he covers all of these categories. That 77 rating that you see is the same as guys like Rope Hintz, Zach Hyman, Matt Zuccarello, Anders Lee, Patrice Bergeron, albeit in a smaller sample size. So that's how well he's covering categories across all of these, these specific categories: hits, blocks, shots, power play, goals, assists, points, etc. Now, another guy with a high ownership is Logan Couture at 50%, but he's so complete in every category that he ranks 21st in the Data Draft Player Hub rankings at an 81. His best features are goal scoring and power play, but he does a little bit of everything, and he does have a 4-game week against Vancouver, Philly, Dallas, and Chicago. So 3 teams that bleed goals left and right. And then that game against the Hawks is a Sunday matchup. So if you're looking for a Sunday stream, Logan Couture is probably the option there. Last and probably least is Shane Pinto. The Sens have a 4-game week, but almost everyone you'd want to own is owned up. The only exception is maybe Shane Pinto at 9%. He's got 5 points in his last 7 games, despite not scoring at the pace he was at earlier in the season. This isn't the best ad in general because he only has 2 assists, 3 shots, and 3 hits over his last 4 games. So he's not really hot. He's not giving you that floor. You're just hoping that he can go off at any given moment. And this week they play Boston, Washington, Detroit, and Buffalo. So no easy matchups there either. But for deep league plays, if you need somebody from one of these teams, he's got a 4-game week, and that could help you volume-wise. Now, as we move to the Week 12 goalie ads, the top goalie ad this week will probably be the Sabres tandem, Craig Anderson and Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen. Anderson, over the last month, 4 starts, 3 wins, 2.44 goals against, and a .933 save percentage with a shutout. The last 2 games, he's got 2 wins, 1.0 goals against, a .972, so getting excellent numbers when he's in net. But he does share the net with UPL, who is getting a longer look to be the goalie of the present/future for Buffalo. So UPL in his last 2 games, 2 wins, 1.0 goals against, and a .952 save percentage. And Buffalo is 10th in the league in goal differential and 2nd in the league in goals for. So they're going to get that run support to give them a chance to pick up wins every night. So that does help you if you're in points leagues that weight wins higher than just regular save percentage or goals against. This week, they have 2 very winnable games against Columbus and Ottawa, then a toss-up kind of game against the Red Wings, but they have won the previous 2 matchups this year, 8-3 and 5-4, so it may be a little bit higher scoring, but they do apparently match up well with Detroit. The tough matchup is against Boston, and it'll be interesting to see who they start for that game, but if you need a Sunday goalie stream, Saturday night, go and check and see who starts the Saturday night game and go grab the other guy for Sunday. Now, up next, we have Colin Delia, only 1% owned. And while Spencer Martin has 10 wins in 18 games this year, he has a 3.66 goals against and an .884 save percentage. And Vancouver has the lowest combined save percentage in the league. So Delia was given an opportunity against Edmonton before the break. He played really well, kept him in the game, made 31 saves, and got the W. I would assume he'll get 1 start this week, and depending on how they feel, he could potentially get 2. But I would treat this as a nightly stream more so than a weekly stream because there isn't any guarantee that he starts at all. The Canucks don't have any back-to-back games, and they play Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. So if you're using 2 goaltenders on those heavy nights, maybe he's not the positional or the goalie ad for this week. In a very similar situation, Phoenix Copley has done the same type of thing in LA, only for a lot more sample size. So I mentioned him in the Week 9 video on December 4th, about 3 weeks ago. And if you picked him up then, you got 6 wins in 7 games with a .249 goals against and a .910 save percentage. And he's essentially stabilized the entire Kings team. They just needed basically league average goaltending as they are a pretty solid team. And he's providing that and a little bit more. So LA has 2 difficult matchups. At home against Vegas Tuesday, then at Colorado Thursday, and then back home to host the Flyers on Sunday. So if he gets 2 out of 3 of those starts, that could be a good weekly stream for Phoenix Copley, who is 27% owned. So his ownership is way higher than it was 3 weeks ago when I first mentioned him on the channel. Now up next, we have a back-to-back for Vegas, Tuesday, Wednesday at LA and Anaheim. And the second of the 2, I would imagine, will go to Aiden Hill, who's 18% owned. And his last 2 starts weren't great, but in his last 4 combined, he's got 3 wins, a .249 goals against, and a .905 save percentage. And Vegas is 10th in the league in goals against per game at 2.78. And on top of all of that, Anaheim is last in the league with 2.31 goals for per game. So if he gets this Anaheim matchup, it is a really nice spot start for Aiden Hill if you want that nightly stream. So keep an eye on that. And, if he doesn't get that start, then maybe don't try to start him in the front half of the back-to-back. LA is a pretty good team. But Anaheim will give you a pretty good matchup there. And lastly, we have Casey DeSmith, and this is a back-to-back for Pittsburgh against the Isles in Belmont on Tuesday, then back home to face the Red Wings on Wednesday. Now, an interesting fact, in the last 2 games between these two teams, the Penguins won both, and they outscored the Red Wings 18-4. Yes, you heard that right. It was an 11-2 win and a 7-2 win. So that makes for a great matchup for Casey DeSmith on Wednesday if he plays that game. And I would imagine that they'll use Jari for the Islanders game, but keep an eye on the starting goalies because if DeSmith gets the Isles game, he has a 3-1-1 record with a .239 and a .918 against the Isles in his career. So he's got a pretty good opportunity in either of those 2 games, and he's only 8% owned. So that could be a really nice spot start if you need one this week. Now, instead of doing hot and cold in a week where not much changed and there was only 3 games on average last week, I'll cover the top performers from week 11 here instead of a separate video. So we have a couple guys here. Phillip Danault is always a reliable streamer. If you look at the player hub on the left, you'll see why. He covers just about everything at a very consistent rate. He had a very good week, 3 points in 3 games, 1 on the power play, and 9 shots and 6 blocks to go with that. On top of that, he's in the top 15 in terms of face-off wins. So if you're in a face-off league, he's definitely a must-own for the entire year, probably, more so than regular leagues that don't have face-off wins. If you don't have face-offs, he's 28% owned, and he's always a very reliable streamer. Now, Eric Gustafsson was playing top pair with John Carlson, and it was working really well for him with 4 points in 3 games last week, 10 shots, and 5 blocks to go with that. But with Carlson out, I do wonder how the D pairs shake out, but he is getting top 4 minutes either way, and his role could increase with Carlson out, and he was already on power play 1 with Carlson in the lineup. So this is a decent streaming option for a little while. I own Carlson, so that was a little bit devastating to see him get smashed in the face by that puck. I hope he's okay. But Eric Gustafsson, 25% owned, and he is a top pair, top power play defenseman in Washington right now. So that is a really good own, especially this week. Now, the best fantasy option last week, who's likely available for you, is Jordan Staal at 12%. So he had 5 points in 3 games, 2 goals, 3 assists, and 8 hits. His hits and goal coverage are his only 2 ownable features, but if his production is starting to come around, that is a good sign. So last year he was at 0.22 goals per game, and then he was also 94th percentile in hits. But he did a little bit more of everything last year and was a 65 rating compared to a 48 this year. So he has no power play points this year, and his assists have tailed off. So that's why he's not as ownable. But if he's starting to produce at this level, he could potentially be a really decent streaming option going forward. But he is always useful in face-off leagues where he ranks 14th in the entire NHL in face-off wins. So that's another face-off guy that's a potential weekly streamer, and he did have a great week last week, even better than Phil Danault. So that's, with Danault, you get a little bit more consistency, about a point per game average, if you're looking for a good week. Some weeks it's not a point per game. For Jordan Staal, you're getting less consistency, but more of a ability to pop off as he's starting to find his offensive game again. Now, Nick Schmaltz had a good 3-point week as well, 2 goals, 1 assist, 9 shots, and he's one of those better options on a bad team. So last year he had a great line assignment with Clayton Keller. They had excellent chemistry, and he was above the 90th percentile in points, goals, and assists per game. So if they can find that chemistry again, this could be a really good opportunity to get access to his file. And as it is, he has 14 points in 17 games this year, which is really encouraging. So he's a guy I was hoping to target in my one face-off league as a center right wing. I had him for a while. I couldn't keep him on the IR any longer, but I'll be targeting him again, especially if he can start that chemistry with Clayton Keller again. And last but not least, Colton Parayko, 12% owned. He's definitely a hits blocks D, averaging 1.76 of each per game and almost 2 shots per game. But he also added some offense last week with a goal and an assist, 9 shots, 4 hits, and 8 blocks. So he's a pretty stable and reliable option for hits and blocks. He's just not elite level in any particular category. Now, really quick, I did want to bring an IR update, which we don't have much new information on some fronts, but there are some guys who are slated to return in January. So let's take a look at a few. Now, Gabe Landeskog, arguably the second most important IR stash this year. He's 94% owned. He was given a 4-week timetable on December 15th. And at that point, he'd been skating on his own for 2 weeks already. So I'd look for him to return around mid-January, but look for those updates to see if he's at full practice in a non-contact jersey. But a guy who is a little bit closer and is potentially targetable on the wire is Tom Wilson, only 50% owned. He's an elite hits and goals right winger, and he practiced in a normal jersey last week, and he could be very close to returning. Now, the bad news is that John Carlson is now out after taking a puck to the face, so the Caps just cannot get 100% healthy, but this is a positive sign for fantasy, as he's a bit of a unicorn with that hits and goals coverage, which we were trying to find in Tanner Jeannot, and I just mentioned in Brandon Tanev, but you can consistently and reliably find it with Tom Wilson year in and year out. Now, Nick Ehlers was given a 2 to 3 week estimated timetable from Darren Dreger on December 21st, and that would mean that he's likely back sometime between January 4th and January 11th, which is excellent news for me as I've stashed him for weeks now. So if you're looking, if you've already stashed him, you could potentially start thinking about who you want to drop. He's 86% owned, so you probably can't go out and target him now. But yeah, if you do have him, start thinking about who you want to drop when he's back healthy. And speaking of guys that I'm stashing, Max Pacioretty has been skating with the Canes in a non-contact jersey since December 15th. At that time, he was quote-unquote not close to playing, according to Rod Brindamore, but I would expect him back at some point this month. So that's another guy you could actually target on the waiver wire, 44% owned. And he's typically good for a lot of different things, specifically goals and shots, and hopefully he'll help their power play as well. Anthony Duclair, 14% owned, skated in a non-contact jersey December 19th. His timeline has been upgraded from months to weeks, and an article on Florida Hockey Now listed the All-Star game as a potential target for his return. So think late January or maybe early February for his potential return, but that could boost Florida's offense, which has been struggling compared to last year. And in addition to all these guys, Andre Palat was quote-unquote close to joining the team for practice on December 23rd, according to Lindy Ruff, and he's been skating on his own. So he's a guy on that Devils team that could potentially boost their offensive production. They've been, like I just mentioned earlier, they're 1-6-1 in their last 8 games, and their shooting percentage is down. And he's a guy that typically scores with not that many chances, so his shooting percentage is usually higher, and maybe that can boost New Jersey's offensive production. So if you want to get out in front of that, now would be the time to start thinking about Andre Palat. Now, lastly, instead of the THHL weekly recap, I just wanted to do a 2022 year in review for my teams, but more importantly for the data draft strategy. Now, I'm undefeated in my face-off league using the data draft strategy for face-offs specifically. I've been giving that out to some of the guys in the Patreon group. I'm number one in my number one league, the THHL, the money league that I'm in, though I do have a difficult matchup this week with the Toe Dragons, who I beat in week 1. But I may be missing John Carlson, Aaron Ekblad, and Radko Gudas, so my D may not have it this week. Now you see here I'm 5th in this random other league that I'm in, and the reason for that is twofold. So number one, I've been missing Evander Kane for most of the season, and he's one of the best players in that league format. And number two, there's only one IR spot in this league, which makes absolutely no sense to me. If I were able to actually make some moves, I'm sure I'd be slightly higher up. And then another thing is when you put a waiver claim in, it doesn't take effect that night. It takes another day for you to get that waiver claim in. So that's really frustrating as well, which is why I'm struggling in that league. But still top half of the league, nothing crazy there. Lastly, I was undefeated in the data draft league until a few weeks ago. Then I went on a 4-game skid, just won last week to bump me back into 3rd place. And the reason I'm mentioning this is partially to brag since I'm a huge loser, but also to show that the data draft strategy works. And if you've used it for your draft and have kept up with the videos that I've been putting out, you're likely way ahead of the game. Same like these guys here. These guys are all way ahead of the game. They're all having a lot of success. You can see here, this guy Serge was 1-4 and 14th out of 14 in his league. Then he started following the data draft method, and now he's 4th, and he's been 6-5. So moving up in the right direction. Jared just won 8 in a row, 8-game heater. He's now 9-2 in his main league. Dez, who was pretty good as it was, but he's started to find the data draft method as well, and he's undefeated in 2 leagues this year. And then another patron went from 11th place to 2nd after following some data draft advice. So if these, I've been putting out that you're likely way ahead of the game, and these guys here are all ahead of the game, and they're all a part of the Data Draft Discord group. So if you want access to the Discord group, just click the Patreon link in the description. For just $5 a month, you get access to the player and goalie hubs and all of the visualizations I use on the channel. And then you get early access to certain content, and then you get access to the Discord server with a lot of great, knowledgeable fantasy owners and myself there using data to help you and your team. If you just want the player hubs and the visualizations, some of which you saw in this video, you can access those for $3 a month without access to the Discord. But with all that said, that's going to do it for this one. Thanks a lot for sticking with it to the end. Remember to like and subscribe. I'm trying to reach 2,000 subs before the All-Star break, so help me get to that goal if you can. But thanks again, and I will see you in the next one.